Chris Fagan, how you going?
Good, thanks, Dylan. Yeah.
Now, mate, I have to apologise off the top. I've got it. You know when you've got something to say and you need to just get it off your chest?
Mm.
I made a silly call at the start of the year.
What'd you say?
I said Brisbane would slide out of the 8.
Well, you
And
look like you're going to be right there for a while, mate.
I was looking like a genius.
Yeah, you were.
I was looking like an oracle. I had deals coming left, right and centre from every big – I was nearly going to be the next Kane Corns of our generation. And then things went south for me pretty quickly.
Mm.
So as a big of sort of few months it's been for you, it's also been pretty big few months for me having to cop the backlash of what's happened. But I couldn't have been happier for you, mate. Congratulations on what's been an amazing season, amazing journey in totality. But what a crazy season it's been.
Yeah, it's been hard to believe in a way. Like I feel a little bit sorry for you. Halfway mark and we're 4 wins and 6 losses and a draw and 13th or something. I couldn't, in my wildest of dreams, imagine that we would win the flag at the end of the year. I was really hopeful that we'd improve in the second half of the season because I knew we weren't going as bad as what it looked. But sometimes, you know, if you have negative momentum, it can stay with you all season. So the players and the staff did a super job to turn it around, and yeah, we got momentum at the right time somehow, and here we are. We've won the premiership, so.
Momentum's a fantastic word. We use it a lot when talking about football and even just life in general. But how true is just being things coming together at the right times and finding that momentum at the right time of the season? Like for you guys, it just seemed to really click at the right time.
Yeah, it did. I mean, we had a good win in the first final and then looked like we were going against the Giants and somehow found a way, and that gave the group tremendous confidence. And then we're in a similar position against Geelong, albeit not as far behind in the third quarter, and somehow we found a way. So we got to the grand final, I think, feeling good about ourselves and really positive. And we also were fortunate, although we had a year where there was a fair number of serious injuries, in the finals I think we only used 24 players. I think Oscar McInerney was the only change we made in the entire final series. So we had a really settled lineup. You know, I was worried a little bit about, we got to beat Geelong. That was our second road trip in a row. Could we go a third road trip in a row and have the energy to play? But, Tuesday at training before the grand final, our players were up and about. You can sort of tell if you know them well and you see them every week. And I just didn't think it was going to be a factor. So I thought I was going into the grand final, I was really optimistic that we'd give a good showing.
I saw one of your press conferences. It was really cool in a great way, as obviously a good senior coach would frame up. Like any situation you're in, you're going to try and find the positive in it. You're talking a lot about teams like Geelong and even maybe Port Adelaide to an extent of like their run into the finals being somewhat a little bit unchallenged with some teams versus yours. You play Carlton, you get the jump, they come back. Then you play the Giants, they get the jump, you come back. And then you go up against a pretty good outfit, the Cats at the G, when, are bigger the voice. And I don't know if it was internally or not, but there has been challenges at the G. Like, it sort of seemed like you were ticking a lot of boxes and getting a pretty good resume of what you can do going into a grand final.
Yeah, so, in preparation for games, you often have a look at what the other team's done in the build-up. And I just felt like for most of those weeks, I mean, Carlton was a bit different. They had a lot of injuries. They made a lot of changes for that game. I always think a lot of changes is not necessarily a great thing, even if they're really good players coming back in, because they obviously haven't had any match practice. But, once we got to the grand final, and I'll look back at what Sydney's preparation had been, and even against Geelong, what their preparation had been. The games they'd played in weren't as hard as the games that we'd played in. Our games were high contested and high pressure. And those two teams, their games that they had, albeit Sydney's game against the Giants was a bit harder, but the Port Adelaide game ended up being a softer game. They'd had a week off. It was sort of like they were low contest, low pressure games. So we sort of set ourselves in the finals to be a high pressure team. We hadn't been in the 6 weeks leading into the finals. We talked about that. Well, can we make this a weapon? Because it hasn't been. It might surprise teams. And we were able to bring that in all 4 finals, and particularly the grand final. And I felt like that second quarter when we really got on a roll, our pressure was super high and we scored 7 goals or whatever it was on the back of that pressure. So I felt that's sort of good luck, I reckon, having the opposition have those build-up games. But we tried to cash in on that, the fact that we'd had a harder road, and we thought that might prepare us well.
It's interesting though, right? Like the message that you give to players and how you sort of bring a team together. If you hadn't have had that run in, you would have had to try and manifest some other sort of motivation to get into that game, right?
Yeah,
like,
probably ought to have been going, look, we're really fresh,
we're
boys.
really fresh. Yeah, we're really fresh.
I mean, that's what coaches do. We
Yeah.
always try and make, to our players, we try to make the case to our teams why we're in a good position, why we're in great shape to win this game. And you just got to look at your story and the story of the teams you're playing against and come up with the most positive spin that you can.
Did you learn anything major or even just a 1% tick sort of heading into the grand final as opposed to against the Pies? Was there anything in that year you looked at the preparation going, not necessarily did it not come to fruition in the sense of you're happy with, but you thought, oh, let's play around with this for the next time?
Yeah, so we felt like last year against Collingwood when we got down, we came down on we trained Thursday morning at the Gabba, jumped on a plane. It was a couple of hours late. We got into Melbourne late. Before we knew it, we were into the grand final parade, doing the captain's run at the MCG, and then it was the game. And so I think the biggest thing we got out of last year is come down a day earlier. So we came down on Wednesday, which is the players' day off normally, but they were pretty happy to come down on the Wednesday to prepare for a grand final. So, we jumped on a plane at lunchtime. It didn't matter whether it was delayed or not. We had nothing planned that night other than a team meal at a restaurant up the road from where we were staying. So that was a sort of an easier sort of prep. The families and all the children didn't come down on the same plane. They came down later on and stayed away from the team. They were all there for the end and to celebrate. But so it was just a calmer preparation, a bit more time. There were benefits from having played last year and remembering. We did an exercise immediately post the grand final against Collingwood of just recollections of what we'd learnt in the final series, both positive and growth, and the same from the grand final, and put them in a time capsule, pulled them out just before the finals, and the boys read them all again. So I was like, it hadn't happened all that long ago. So we're in a good mindset, I reckon, coming into this year's grand final. The group was very relaxed. I reckon we're much more relaxed this year than what we were last year. I think everyone felt like we had to be tense and on edge, and sometimes by the time we get to the game, you can be a bit worn out if you do that. So we were much calmer this year, enjoyed the whole process a lot more, and I think it showed by the way that we played on grand final day. Now, sometimes as a coach you think, oh, they're too relaxed, they're too laid back, but the result says we weren't. So it was just a little tweak. I mean, we weren't too far off against Collingwood the year before. We didn't do a lot wrong, but just having a bit more time, I reckon, made a real difference. Just
to harp on that point you said before about finishing the grand final against the Pies, so did you straight away write down feelings, emotions, or what was sort of the goal to write down? What were you?
So it was more what the players learned from the final series, both as an individual and as a team, and then from the grand final as an individual and as a team. Awesome. So, and they were just short little notes, just a little A4 page. Sometimes you have an experience and then 12 months later it's sort of in the distant past and you've sort of forgotten some of the things that you learned. I didn't want to, if we got to that situation again, I wanted to have that there. So as it turned out, we were fortunate enough to get there so we could pull those things out and the boys could reread them, and it brought back a whole lot of memories and most of them positively, because we didn't treat the loss to Collingwood in the grand final as a negative. We just said, what did we learn? So that if we get there again, how can we be better? And that's been the mantra all the way through with me and this team, from where we were 8 years ago down the bottom of the ladder scratching to get a win to being able to salute this year on grand final day. But that's been we've always tried to have a growth mindset. We've never treated failure or mistakes as something to be feared. It's always been something to embrace and learn from. So that's how we've rolled.
It's fascinating. So cool to hear. And I think, when you say it, it sounds so obvious, but I just don't think a lot of people treat losses like that sometimes. And even in particular for me, like I don't know, when I was playing footy, even now, sometimes when you stuff something, you're like, let's move on to the next thing. But it is important to reflect on those moments. I suppose there's one publicly that I've been really fascinated with, and I don't know this guy well, but I have great admiration for him. And I think it's awesome when you go into final series. Like, it boils down to two teams. The stories of both teams and individuals get highlighted through those periods as well. And you look at someone like Jared Berry, who has been through his story of his own life. Then on grand final day against the Pies, I think it was an interview with Mitch Cleary, had been brought up, and you could see that raw emotion of he to his own feelings. I know this wouldn't be everyone's feeling. The club didn't perform to the way he wanted to, and spoke about his mother, what he'd learnt from her. He's a tough person to come back. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. Then to write those notes down, come back and win a grand final. I know it's a big one club thing, but there must be so many of those good stories along the way that we don't know of as well.
Yeah, well, it's full of stories. Every bloke that plays got his own little story, I guess. But the Jared Berry one's particularly interesting. And I saw that interview too. Maybe a week or two after the grand final, and he gave away a 50-metre penalty in the grand final against Collingwood. It was a little bit stiff. I mean, I've seen those not paid, but this one
on
got
grand
paid.
Final day, you should let him go.
And still Sidebottom kicked a goal as a result of that. Was still 50 metres out. I still didn't think he'd kick it because he normally struggles from 40, but for some reason or other, this particular day, he kicked it from 50 straight through the middle. And Jared, if you have a look at his sheet, that's what he wrote about that moment, how much he regretted giving away that 50 and how much he'd like to make up for it. And he got the opportunity in the grand final. I thought he played a super game. And in that second quarter when we were on a roll, he kicked that goal from just on the 50. And I reckon all of those things were going through his mind at that moment. I've watched the game back a few times. I'm thinking, I know what you're thinking, mate, And it's a great story for him that he was able to be so resilient and bounce back the next year. But it's typical of the life that he and his family have led. I obviously didn't know him when his mum was still alive, but I've seen the aftermath of that and the effort he and his family go to raise money for that breast cancer cause. It's something that's something to behold, really. And I was so happy for him on grand final day that we're able to get a win. But all the boys would have a story. A guy like Noah Answorth, he played in the reserves most of the year. Player I've got enormous respect for, but he's so brave. He's always getting injured. He's breaking something or dislocating something, and he got into the team for the last home and away game against Essendon, and then he plays in the next 4 finals and he's a premiership player. But, that same bloke last year, he was injured for the 2023 grand final, couldn't be considered. Dane Zorko's dad, the only way that he could get to Melbourne was to drive, couldn't because he wasn't well. And so Noah Answorth puts his hand up to drive Zorks' dad to the grand final last year, so his old man could watch his son play in his first grand final. And you just go, oh, how good's that? Like, that's a fair sacrifice to make. We've seen plenty of players, probably if they're not in the team, get a bit disappointed and sook it up, but he did that kind gesture for Zorks' dad, and then 12 months later he's repaid for that, And even the Oscar McInerney story who didn't play, like what he did that week, like most blokes would be just flat as a tack and wouldn't want to come anywhere near the footy club. But, he was there on the Tuesday training session, throwing the ball up for centre bounce contest for the rucks to do a bit of ruckcraft practice. Even the fact that he went back out on the ground against Geelong and gave us another 50 minutes, save putting Joey in the ruck, helped us to win the game. Knew that if we won against Geelong that he wouldn't be able to play next week, but it didn't stop him. And the pain he was in when it came out the second time, it was awful. I mean, I showed the boys that the timeline with what Oscar did in that preliminary final at our team meeting the day before the game, and just said, here, if you want to see a bloke giving himself for the team, here it is. This is the greatest example I've ever seen. And, we talked about it before the players went out onto the grounds in the grand final. If you go out with Big O's pulse beating inside you, you're going to be fine today, And so, we've used a lot of stories that are our own stories to motivate, but there's probably stories for all of them, mate, and I probably know most of them, but that's just a little example.
What about your own story? Like, it's fascinating in itself. Obviously, the oldest coach to win a premiership, the first coach to not play league football and win a premiership. It's a few breaking down barriers there for a lot of people. Do you reflect on that? Does it mean anything to you, or do you just take it in your stride?
Yeah, I mean, I know that was the narrative after the grand final, and I knew it would be. I sort of don't consider myself to be that sort of an unknown or inexperienced. I've been really lucky in my football journey to have been associated with a lot of people that have been associated with success, and I've learned a lot from them. So I even go back to my playing days in Tassie. Like I I was coached by Paul Sproul, who is a premiership player at Richmond and was coached by the great Tommy Hafey. So I got a little bit of exposure to the way Tommy used to get his teams to play because we played the same way. I played at Sandy Bay under a fellow by the name of Andy Bennett, who was our coach, and he'd been at Hawthorn and he'd been coached by Alan Jeans. So another premiership coach with high credentials. And then obviously I came over here to work at Melbourne Footy Club, and who's there? Neil Denner. Who's he been coached by? Kevin Sheedy. So another premiership coach. And when I left Melbourne and went to Hawthorn, I'm with Clarko. Who's he been coached by? John Kennedy, Dennis Pagan, all premiership coaches. And then I get to work with Clarko. We win some premierships. So I've sort of been really lucky in my I think I've been in AFL now for 27 years, 8 of those as coach of Brisbane. I sort of had this magnificent football education, not on purpose but accidentally, and I never thought about it till the other day, and I thought, gee, I've been really lucky, the people I've come into contact with. So I feel like in a way the premiership, well, being a part of the premiership and being a coach, that premiership side has been the culmination of a lifetime's work in many ways. And my dad was a coach, so when I was 8 years old, I'm with the old man on the west coast of Tassie on the gravel oval, going to footy training with him, kicking snags at one end of the ground while he's taking his team for training. So it's been in the blood. I'm a school teacher by trade, so that's just another form of coaching, isn't it? Really. So yeah, it all added up. I suppose for me, the bit I like about it is that it's not typical. I don't suppose it's different. My pathway. But hopefully other people who are on a similar pathway to me feel like maybe they're a chance now, that you don't have to have played AFL at the highest level to be a successful coach. Would be one thing, and age shouldn't stop you. And even if you're a two-headed Tasmanian like I am, that shouldn't stop you either. So
they're your words, not mine. We love Tassie here.
Yeah, but as I said, I don't even know whether a Tasmanian's been involved in coaching an AFL grand final. I'm not sure. A premiership, I'm not 100% certain of that. But hopefully it just makes people think that they might be a chance, and the pathway is probably going to be a bit harder. I mean, I'd been working in AFL for 19 years before I got my opportunity to coach the Brisbane Lions, and it took until my 27th year of AFL footy to be a premiership coach. So it's been an exercise of pounding the rock, as I'd say to the players. And eventually the rock cracked open.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Before we move on to my next question, just to harp on the fact, like even Hawthorn, I think about this a lot when you were there. Adam Simpson, Ratton, Damien Hardwick, Leon Cameron, Luke Beveridge, Adam Uze, Damien Monkhurst and Brendan Bolton as well. I don't know if I'm missing any, but there's...
No, I think that's all of them. So they all went on to, except for Monkey.
Yeah, he's at North.
He was at North with Clarko, but all those guys have gone on to be senior coaches, and some of them have coached premierships. So
unbelievable.
Yeah, it was like a university for football coaches at Hawthorn there at one stage. There was so much talent in the ranks.
What did you... I suppose in those periods and when you're winning and being successful, to go back to the Hawthorn days, did you know you were onto something there? Did you think like, geez, we've got a good group, or does it just manifest when you surround good people with good people, things sort of opportunities open up? Like,
yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, we also had a really good group of players too that could coach themselves to some degree, but the football intellect amongst that group was obviously very high. Many of them have been highly successful AFL players with a lot of games between them. Bolt and I had none, but we we joined in and learnt from those guys and maybe even taught those guys a few things about things that we knew from our teaching backgrounds. But it was just the chemistry was perfect, I guess, in a way. Mature group, smart coaches. It was a good recipe for success.
How important is it, and it's probably a pretty obvious question, but I love talking about this with obviously really esteemed people in the game, to surround yourself with people that one, you respect and you agree with, but two, that challenge you, and three, I suppose, have your back. Like, you look at Hawthorn and the success, and I don't know this, but I'm assuming it was a pretty tight-knit group. And then you look at yourself this year, and over the past couple of years at Brisbane, you got Greg Swan, who's obviously an incredible leader, CEO, Danny Daly, I know you got a really close relationship with Lee Matthews as well. I'm sure there's countless of others, and feel free to jump in with them if there's more. But I've been at clubs where you can start to turn on each other when things don't go your way. And there's a lot of adversity that you've sort of faced in the 23-24 season that I'd love to get your opinion on. Obviously not going into specifics with the Hawthorn saga that you were embroiled with. I don't know if that's the right word, but obviously took a massive toll on yourself and the people involved and everything in the AFL. I can't imagine how challenging that would be for everyone. Into then coming into an off-season, injuries, people talking about off-seasons, lack of form, you're missing games and you're out of the 8. That's a recipe for people to turn on each other.
Yeah.
Like, how do you stick together?
Yeah, that's a big question, that one. Well, good people is the key to it. I've always thought that. I just think fill your football club with as many good people as you can, and you've got a fair chance to stand up in most situations.
But it only takes one to crack.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, look, the first thing I think is this: if you're the coach of the club, you can't for 1 minute think you've got the responsibility to do all that stuff on your own, right? The coaches on our coaching team, the people who work at the club, Lee at board level and Swanee as the CEO, we're all incredibly experienced people. Can't beat a bit of grey hair in places because they've seen most things. And what I would say is that during that time, there was no panic in the place. It was just like, well, we've gone for 5 years in a row now. We've made finals. We've been really consistent. We're just having a bit of a patch right now. If we stay calm, stay together, we'll be able to work our way through this. And the good part about it was, statistically, in terms of on-field performance, a lot of the KPIs were healthy. They were as good as they were the previous year when we were sitting second on the ladder for most of the season. The thing that was killing us was that our accuracy in front of goal hurt us in quite a few games, and our ability to complete plays when we got the ball inside 50 was letting us down as well. We're dropping a lot of marks. I think we were number one for inside 50s. If we weren't number one, we were definitely number two. So there wasn't it wasn't like we were getting smashed statistically. So I was always able to present to the players, and I did it at the halfway mark of the year when we're 13th on the ladder and said, boys, we're going better than you think, so don't listen to all the narrative out there. And I know why that narrative's there, but my job is to always present the truth to you, present the facts to you. And these are the facts. And if you want to go and look at champion data and check to see whether I'm making up rubbish or I'm telling the truth, you're welcome to go and do that, but I'm telling you this is the truth. So we looked at it all. We were actually ahead in a lot of the KPIs and where we were last year. And then we just sort of talked about the idea of staying calm and also maybe not playing as tight and as I just thought we were full of anxiety in the first half of the year. It was almost like we lost the grand final the year before and we just so desperately wanted to get back there that we weren't playing with real flow and connection. And I think that showed in the goal kicking a lot. In a way, that's one of the manifestations of it. So, that halfway mark, that's when we came up with the if you're walking on thin ice, you might as well dance saying, and something I'd read years ago, but I actually sort of liked the idea of it. It was like, well, we're in a bit of strife here, but we can either sink or we can have a crack. And I had to make sure as a coach that if I was going to go with that theme, that I had to be a pretty positive sort of a guy around the place and not be whacking them for mistakes and coming down hard on the group. So that's the way we decided to go. And it seemed to resonate with the players. Don't ask me why. You'd have to ask them. I was sort of, to be honest, grasping at straws a little bit at that point in time to try and sort of say something or come up with some words or a theme that might help the group. But they embraced that. We revisited a bit of Ted Lasso stuff as well. Fantastic show, Ted Lasso. But I just love that one where they talk about goldfish when Danny Rojas had the yips in front of goal.
Yeah.
And, that resonated with them too. And we just got on a bit of a roll. I think we won 9 in a row. And then a little bit of disaster hit. We got beaten by Collingwood. I think Giants first beat us. Not sure what the order not sure the order, but Giants beat us and then Collingwood beat us by points. So we lost 2 games and then suddenly we dropped from the top 4 back to 5th, and we had no way of getting back in the top 4. We had to beat Essendon in the last home and away game to make sure that we finished 5th and had at least one home final. But when we lost those 2 games, I just reinforced what we talked about. I said, boys, you've been the most informed team in the competition for the last 9 weeks. You lose 2, you're still the most informed competition. Have a look what everybody else has done in this period of time. It's pretty hard to win every week. Let's pick ourselves up and get going again with the same theory that worked for us. And they just embraced that pretty well. And what happened in the finals happened in the finals. But we were just an incredibly positive group all the way through and just kept believing in ourselves.
It's amazing. I want to come back to maybe 1 or 2 wins that you thought did kickstart that, like kickstarted the run, because you can win 1, you can win 2, but then to go 9 in a row, there's a bit of momentum there. But back to the question, I'm just so fascinated because something that I've always, I think as you made a really good point about grey hair, right? I'm actually starting to get a little bit grey. And I do feel like, you start to learn a few more things as you get older. You said before you've seen situations, you've been through it, you've navigated before certain things. But there are times too where, like, obviously, can feel like the world's caving in on you. Modern age now, we're all about looking after ourselves in football clubs. You get the best, performance people around you to make sure that people are at the optimal level of their game. Being a senior coach, how did you keep yourself in the best space throughout those times? I'm not trying to overharp it, but it must have been extremely challenging.
Yeah, it's a lonely job. You do feel the pressure to perform. I must admit, I was sort of amazed at how quickly things turned from losing the grand final by less than a goal last year. Was 0-3 at the start of the year, and I'm losing my job. So I've gone, well, that quick, eh?
Did you think that was a reality at any stage?
No, not really. But that was the outside narrative. I think there was a view that I'm an old guy. Maybe I'm not as tactically astute as what some of the younger coaches are. Maybe we've got this group that's got all this talent, and I'm not the right bloke to get the best out of them. I mean, that was the narrative, and I can sort of understand it, but in another way I can't, because we won more games than any other team in the last 5 years. I'm thinking, well, we can't be that bad tactically if we keep winning games of footy. And the old argument about, you've got the most talent. I don't know how anyone can prove that, to be honest with you. How do you prove that? Like, that's just someone making stuff up, isn't it? It's just someone's opinion. Maybe we're really good at coaching the talent that we've got to work together to play well. I don't know, but that was the narrative that was around us, and all that was challenging. I'm like anyone else, so I've got a team around me that look after me. Lee Matthews is one of those blokes, and they always say to me, "Folks, you've got to be the calmest bloke in the place, because if you start to panic, then the whole place will fall apart." So Lee said that to me from day one. And, I catch up with him for dinner most weeks in the footy season, and Swanee as well. And what do you reckon we talk about? The wives at one end of the table talking about whatever they talk about. We talk about everything footy. So I learned so much from those guys, and I felt very supported by Swanee and Lee. And, they would be quite deliberately humorous and funny at those dinners, I think, just to lighten the load a little bit for me. But I always knew that I had their support, as with Andrew Wellington, our president, and I've also had Phil Smythe, who played basketball for Australia, the general. I think he played in 5 Olympics, captain of Australia, really good coach in his own right. He's been working at our club since 2019, and he and I have become great friends. And he's a mentor of mine that I can talk to about anything. So if I'm having a dark day and I'm filthy on the world and feeling sorry for myself, I can talk to him. He can understand me. He can tell me to pull my head in and wake up to myself, or he can empathise with me. But he seems to be able to pull the right reins in that regard. So he's been great. Anthony Clarko, our sports psychologist. I don't know whether you know Anthony from your Carlton days.
Yeah, I know Clary well.
I've known Clary for a long time. He's a bit of a character, but he's got a great heart. And as I said, I've known him for 20 years, and he was a great support to me during those times. Just be the odd phone call to see how I was tracking and give me a few strategies, because you need a few at times. There's no doubt about that. And I've got a fantastic family. you can't beat that. My wife's been with me all the way through this football journey from Tassie to we went to uni together, and then I think it's our 40th anniversary coming up this year. So we've been together a long time. It's a bloody long time, isn't it, eh? 40
That's fantastic.
years. But so yeah, with family support and great support at the footy club, then that's helped me, and I've needed that. There's no doubt about that, because there's been some things going on that aren't just to do with footy that have been challenging the last couple of years. They take away a lot of emotional energy. But yeah, they've helped me get through it, and the players at the club have been brilliant too. Like, when all this Hawthorn thing first started, which I know that's what you're referring to, is I can't believe how many players walked into my office one at a time just to say that they were right behind me and they're going to support me, and our Indigenous players as well, and that really helped. So we're a tight footy club. We tend to get around someone if they need a bit of a hand. I've tried to make it that sort of club, and in my sort of time of need, that's come back my way. So it's been pretty good.
Oh, it's awesome to hear. It's all about surrounding yourself with those people that you know are going to support you both ways. And I think there's a. Have you ever seen the film Bra Boys back in the day? Maroubra, Bra Boys.
No.
Do you know the Bra Boys?
No.
So Maroubra, there was like a surf beach gang there.
Yeah.
Anyway, besides the point, there's this famous quote that I learnt when I was young, and it just stood out with me for a long time. And it's like, it's not knowing people have your back; it's knowing you have theirs.
Yeah.
And in turn, once you have theirs, you know that they'll have yours.
Yeah.
So sometimes the biggest question is not knowing people will stand up for you, but it's knowing you'll be there for them, and in turn it happens back the other way. So
trust is definitely a two-way
Exactly.
process, and I probably get accused of being too loyal to my players and not dropping them often enough. But what happened on grand final day is the reason why I go that way.
Yeah,
because it's all about connection and playing together on the footy field, and it's not just about tactics and strategy. Winning the big ones, there's a lot of things that you can't see that go on at a interpersonal level that create premiership teams. I mean, I bet any money if you talk to your old man about his Carlton days, he'd tell you some of the same stories. They were a connected group. Can get through most situations.
For sure. Speaking of Clary, Anthony Clarko, a very funny man. Obviously, I had him at Carlton as well, and to this day, it's such a formative sort of year for me, like learning all that stuff. I was probably back when I was younger. I would have been a shocking person to coach. I was, the opposite of a growth mindset. Never my problem, always someone else's. Just pig-headed young bloke. Just had no idea what was going on. But I learned a lot from Bolts and Clary through that time.
Yeah.
I still remember so many of those things. There was times where, we spoke about the equilibrium, we spoke about, growth mindset, and one that stands out is when he brought in these sheep's brains and we're identifying all the parts of the brain. And there's this part called the hypothalamus, which is activated, it helps grit, which is activated by being grateful.
Yeah.
And he was onto this stuff like a lot before anyone. And I suppose my question is, what's the weirdest thing you've seen him do, or do you consult on those things that he does, or what's?
No, he's done nothing really weird.
Okay.
Since
maybe it didn't work at
He's been
Carlton,
to
so he didn't
Lions
bring
for
him.
the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So we made 2 grand finals. So he's probably out in the world claiming that right now. But he's no doubt helped, as did a lot of other people. But there's nothing really weird like that. I mean, our group was fairly mature when he got there in a sense, and we just needed someone to top him off. So he works more with the individuals than he does with the whole group. He more works through me on those sorts of things because I think it's better for the coaches to.
So it helps you come up with the themes and the ideologies.
Themes and ideas and things like that, which, it was his idea to do those sheets and put them in the time capsule. And I should have given him credit for that at the start. He was the one that suggested that because it sort of, you can pull it out and put yourself back in that moment, which we did this year. So they're sort of the little bits and pieces he gives us. Obviously, he's based down here in Melbourne, so we get to see him once for a week, once a month. Come up to Brisbane, come to all our games down here. So but I remember talking to David Parkin and sort of became friends with him long time ago, and he said we know so much about football and we know so much about how to prepare players physically, but we still don't tap into what's going on in their heads enough. And I still think that's the case. It's like if you go see the club psychologist, there's something wrong with you. It's actually not the right way to look at it. It's so much of sport, and the fine line at the top level is all about what's going on inside your head. And if you can get the majority of your players thinking in the right way that suits them to get maximum performance, then why wouldn't you embrace the idea of a sports psychologist? We don't force our blokes to work with Clary, but a number of them do, and they get a fair bit out of it.
What about when it comes to your own coaching methods of when you first started out to where you are now? I'm sure there's been a lot of evolution of how that's transpired, but coaching a team to turn a season around versus coaching the individuals maybe on their performance or roles or things you need from them. How have you sort of, well, actually, has that been something you've done? Like, I feel like for some reason, and again, maybe it's I'm falling into the trap of listening to the media here, but you say Brisbane's most talented team. I feel like it does have a lot of different individuals. Like you've got your straighty 180 players, but then you've got your like Joe Danaher, who's a good friend of mine, but is just his own person, loves doing his own thing. So how do you balance a team like that of different individuals, but also one message?
Yeah. Everyone learns differently. Everyone has different personalities. I spent 4 years at university learning about that when I wanted to become a teacher. So I come in as a coach respecting that fact. I've always felt like, and I was coached like this to a great degree back when I played, which is a long time ago, but it was like you're all robots and you all got treated the same way. And it was like you got told straight between the eyes what was going on and you had to cop it. I think there's different ways to get people to perform at their best, and the job of a coach nowadays is to tune into what makes each person tick. I tend not to be a berater in front of the group. If I'm going to go crook, it'll be to the team, not to individuals. If I want to have firm words with an individual, we have that one-on-one. And I tend not to tell. I ask, how do you think you responded in that situation? And if you had your time over again, would you do it differently? Because I'm pretty keen to find out that they've actually recognised that maybe they did the wrong thing there and that there was a learning that you could take from it. So some people might say that's coaching the soft way. I think it's coaching the smart way in a sense, because, you know, you want your players to learn, and you're always better if you learn your own lessons. It's no good just agreeing with me because you want the coach to shut up. I want them to know, to have learned from the situation and be able to be better at it the next time, you know. I know with Joey Danaher, the best thing you can do for Joey is just let him enjoy his football. Don't pick on him for every brain fade that he has, because he's going to have them. That's Joey. He isn't going to change whether you yell at him about him for doing them or not. You know, I might have a conversation with Joe. Yeah, what were you thinking there, mate? And he'll tell me exactly what he was thinking, and we'll have a laugh, and then we'll move on, because I don't know, I think happy players play better football. Yeah. And, you know, by and large, that's been the approach. It doesn't mean you dodge the issues. It's just you deal with them in a different way, in a way that's constructive and that doesn't make that player feel less of a person because you've challenged them. You're trying to raise them up as a coach, not knock them down. That's how I see it. It's hard enough as it is with all the critics out there, mate. There's plenty of them.
There is plenty of them. The way I probably see that, and to show it into that full circle moment too, like if you're, you know, using Joe Danaher as an example, you're saying, mate, don't do that stuff. You look at what he then did against the Giants, kicks that one from the bench, like that gets taken out of his game, and then you don't have that brilliance of, you know, getting into getting to where you got to. Yeah,
I mean, if blokes play, and you would have experienced this at times where you're just worried about what the coach is thinking. Am I going to stuff up here? I don't want my blokes second guessing themselves like that. I want them to know that I'm fully behind them, and if they make a mistake, so be it. You learn from it.
There's a reality to it too, though, right? Like how – this is just off-topic question, because I've been in that situation before as a player. I'd never say cemented in a best 22, so always in and out of the team. And it's quite it's a different conversation to probably players that are, you know, those 15 guys that are in every week. Always in the team. And I just used to avoid any conversation with a senior coach, and all I'd focus on was improvement, what I could improve versus what I was actually good at. Like, what do you think? Like, how's your system around guys that are probably in and out of the team that have got those opportunities? You think of a guy like you said before, Noah Ainsworth, who wasn't in the in the best 22, but he's made his way in. Like, obviously, there's a different way of coaching that style because you can't always focusing on positives with them.
No, I know, I understand that. There's always a group of players that are in that bloody awful zone where sometimes they're in the team and sometimes they're not in the team. Look, one of the it's not an easy question to answer, but one of the things I've done from the day I arrived at Brisbane, and I still do it now, is 3 or 4 times a year I just blow up 2 days and I just have one-on-ones with every player on the list. Because as a senior coach, you tend to spend all your time with those 15 guys you're talking about, right? And the others sort of like, it's a bit haphazard. But I've always done that because I want them to know that I'm interested in them. I'm aware of how they're going. I think everyone's got a challenge going on in their head in AFL footy, and through having those conversations, you find out what those challenges are, and you can help them through them. And I'm honest. Sometimes I go to them, listen, you're so stiff that you're not in the AFL team, and you might find that hard to comprehend, but that's how I feel about you. But we can only pick so many each week and so many in your position. So I just try and have open and honest conversations with them all the time. I don't know what else you can do other than that, and to be praiseworthy of performance, to make sure that where you can, you go to watch their games when they play in the VFL. That's not always possible. But I think, and I'm fairly proactive. If I know, I'm pretty close to Ben Hudson, our VFL coach, and he'll tell me when he thinks there's some guys in the twos that just need to have a conversation with the head coach just to get them back on track, because they start to sort of wane a little bit in their form and in their belief and whether they're ever going to get another opportunity. So you can't promise people anything, but I think if you give them time, time's a wonderful thing to give people, I think, and you go out of your way to do it. I think there's benefits to that.
I think it's a really important conversation, and like for both ways, because there'll be a lot of people listening to this that in their own world relating it back to just the workforce and bits and pieces. In different teams, it's the same sort of situation. There's a boss, there's a role, there's a coach, there's these things, and there's the player, which I wish I was a lot better at, that I know a lot of guys do. Right, you put 100% of your energy into the coach, and you think, geez, he's thinking this about me, he's thinking this about me. Then you think, divide that by 44. That's how many other people he's got to worry about, let alone the CEOs, boards, staff, all those things. Like, don't stress as much. Just go have the conversation. Yeah. Then there's the other point that you're making around, like, just come have the conversation. I'm going to tell you exactly what's honest. Like, I think Leon Cameron was so good at that. He was fully transparent with a lot of players, being like, look, we're going to come up, you're going to play, but you're not always going to be in the team because of X, Y, and Z. This is where we're going with things. So I think like that transparency is getting a lot better at where things need to go, for sure.
I think people like to know exactly where they stand. Yeah. And if they know exactly where they stand, they can deal with that a lot better than the wondering and thinking, what's going on here, what's going on there. And you can use your energy to perform rather than your energy to think and bloody, ponder over things too much.
Well, sometimes you can if you do it in the right way, and if other times you get in your own head. But I think, again, not talking about myself, but I used to get in my own head. But you look at someone that I really admire. I've played a bit of footy with Ryan Lester, coming through the Vic 18s, he's a year older than me, and I think, if I'd have been in his situation, I don't think I could have handled it as well as he did. Like, in and out of the team when Hodge and Birchall come to Brisbane, not because of his playing, but just not being able to get back in the team, just keeps rocking up as a consistent person and nearly one of the most important players sort of going into a final series. Like, it's amazing to see that reward for someone like that.
Yeah, he's a great story, Ryan Lester. I mean, I think he's had 7 one-year deals or something like that. We were joking coming into the finals this year. He stood up and he said, I've had 7 one-year deals. We got 4 one-week contracts. If we can win four by one games, we can win the flag, boys. And, everyone loves him because they know his story.
Yeah.
But I think that why Ryan Lester's still there and why he's played his 200th game and why he's so loved is because he's never been frightened of feedback. He's never been frightened to know the truth about himself. And he's always actively sought feedback. And, if there was one player that I've met in my time in AFL footy, which is 27 years or something like that, who's taken control of his own career and made the best of himself that he can, despite all the things that have happened to him. It's Ryan Lester. I mean, he's played his best footy since he's been 30 years of age plus. He was one of the first magnets that went up on the board the last 2 years. My first 5 or 6 years at Brisbane, he was in and out of the team like a yo-yo. But it never changed his attitude. You know, some blokes get down and out about it, but he'd come and ask you why. He wouldn't always agree with the reasons you gave him, but he'd accept them and move on, go back to the twos, coach the boys down there, do the best that he can, find himself back in the seniors. I mean, I have to say, Luke Hodge was a massive rap for him. Hodge would be smiling if he had heard me say this, but like in some ways, one of the reasons I really stuck with Ryan is because Hodgie had so much respect for him, and look how he's turned out. Premiership player, integral part of the team, great leader. He wasn't in the leadership group this year. He stepped down to allow a younger player to come through, but he's still a leader. That never changed him one little bit. Just a brilliant story, Froggy, and he's got another 1-year contract, so he can keep going.
He wouldn't want it any other way.
No.
On reflection now of Luke Hodge and Grant Birchall coming to Brisbane, how do you think that fast-tracked or maybe not fast-tracked, but helped develop younger players and to get you to where you were meant to be? Do you think it was like a really good case study of what can happen with some senior leadership and performance winners?
Yeah, obviously I was fortunate enough to be at Hawthorn during that successful period. And obviously Hodge is the standout leader of the last 20 or 30 years in AFL footy, to be honest. And when he retired at Hawthorn, I sent him a cheeky text and said, if you still got a few years left in you, we wouldn't mind an on-field coach up here. Not thinking he was going to send me a positive response, and he didn't straight away. It sort of came about 2 weeks later. Actually, I've been thinking about that, and as it turned out, he ended up a Brisbane Lions player. I thought we were so young, and the best way young players can learn is off other experienced players who are willing to give of their time and knowledge. And Hodgie wasn't trying to. When he came to us, he wasn't trying to cement his spot in the team. He's a highly credentialed, well thought of Hall of Fame type captain, 3-time Premiership captain, etc., etc. So he was always going to give those who wanted to listen to him a lot of valuable advice on leadership. And I just thought when I first got to the club, we had a real lack of on-field leadership. No one's fault, not blaming anyone. It's just the way it was. And we needed to develop density in that area. So Hodgie was an important part of that. He was a good player for us. The players could see how he led out on the field on match day, but also how he did it during the week. And from that, we've gone from a situation of having a lack of leadership to a large number of leaders. We've got 8. Everyone laughs at us. We've got 8 in our leadership group. They all deserve to be there. Guys like Lester and Lincoln McCarthy and some of those boys stepped down last year, but they're still leaders. Joey Danaher wasn't in the group, but he was still a leader in his own way. We've now got great leadership density at the club, which is what I saw at Hawthorn. That was one of the things I wanted to do when I got to Brisbane. I thought, there's not enough leaders here. We need to get a lot of leaders. And we've done that. Hodge has been massive in that, huge. I can't thank him enough. And Birch came a little bit later than Hodgie, I think 2 years later, but he too brought that experience as well. It's probably not as overt a leader as what Luke is. He'll tell it to you straight between the eyes, and he's brilliant in the game day situation. But so was Birch. That was Birch's strength, I reckon, more out on the ground and directing the traffic. And when you play at halfback, it's a good place to do it from. So both those boys played a huge role in the growth of leadership within our football club, which is a massively important part of becoming a successful team.
What do you look for in a leadership group or bringing leaders into a club? Is it for you standards? Is it on-field performance, hard conversations, or is it just important to have a mix of all across a group, I suppose?
Yeah, probably a mix. I mean, first and foremost, one of the first things we did when we started on this together 8 years ago, Simon Fletcher from Leading Teams, give them a plug, but he's been working with us for the last 8 years, and the first thing we did was we came up with a trademark that we wanted to live and play by, and it's still the same trademark that we had 8 years ago that we've got now with a few little refinements, but the language is still the same. And, one of my jobs as the senior coach and all the other coaches is to make sure that we always measure that trademark and keep it in the eyes of the players. So, the first thing leaders have to be is they have to be the best at the trademark, whatever those things are that you decide are important to you. They need to be, I think, good relationship builders and sort of almost an extension of me as the senior coach. I think that's one of the key factors. They need to be good players, of course. They don't have to be the best. Ryan Lester was in our leadership group when he was in and out of the team because he was such a good person and would lead whichever grade that he played in. So it wasn't necessarily you had to be a good senior player, but you want most of them to be that, of course. Set a good example out on the track. I've always been big since the day I arrived on the resilience thing, and that success won't happen overnight. We'll fail our way to be the best team eventually. And we use the old I was lucky enough to go to San Antonio Spurs back in 2012. Gregg Poppovich is their coach, and they've got a big rock and a big sledgehammer out the front. And there's a poem on the written on there, Stonecutter's Credo, and the theme of that is pound the rock, and it's the idea that the stonecutter bashes away at his rock, and on the 101st strike, the rock breaks open, but it wasn't just that final blow that did it. It was all the blows that went before it. And so we've had that up on the wall at our footy club for such a long time, and we've lived by it. And if you were at our club, you'll hear the boys all the time during games and at meetings say, boys, just got to keep pounding the rock, and we'll get there. So I as coach had to show them evidence along the way, but I needed leaders who could understand that growth mindset thing and the fact that success doesn't come overnight. You've got to keep working away at it, and there's going to be disappointments, and there's going to be days when you don't think you're going to get there. Sometimes you think things are impossible until you do them, and then you go, okay, all those things that we did got us there. So that's been our story.
It's a great analogy. How do you frame that now? So you've set up, I suppose, a theme maybe on not an underdog story, but a chasing story.
Yep. Then
you turn into now like the hunted. You want to obviously go back to back. You got to try and go again. Do things have to be revisited? Because, for example, I was chatting to an Olympian yesterday, Nina Kennedy. She wins a gold medal. Her whole, theory had been around winning this gold medal, like trying to get to this gold medal. And then you become a gold medalist.
What's next?
The same story doesn't really work.
No. It's not an easy question to answer because in some ways as a coach you've got to move with what happens in that next season and try and extract from each thing that happens something to motivate the group. The one thing I think about our group is we're not a flash in the pan, right? We haven't. This didn't just happen out of the blue. I remember when Hawthorn won in 2008, Clarko's third year. A lot happened so quickly.
No one expected to beat
Geelong. No one expected it. It was just like, wow. And then everyone said, how good is this team going to be for the next so many years? Guess what happened the next year? They didn't make it. And the next year they got knocked out in the first week of the finals. And the next year they got beaten in the preliminary final. And the next year they lost the grand final. And then they won 3 in a row. That group, I reckon, is where that won 3 in a row. And I'm not saying we can win 3 in a row, but I think we're more at that point than the Hawthorn group were when they won in 2008. And they were all young and thought, how good's this? We never thought this would happen. And they had a lazy pre-season and turned up a bit tubby, some of them, and, all behind the 8 ball. And it took a long time for us to get a lot of time and a lot of disappointments to get back and win that 3 in a row. I feel like our group's been, this is our 6th year in a row in finals. We've had a lot of disappointments. We've been beaten in a grand final. We've been beaten in prelims. They're quite a mature group, even though we've got some really exciting young players. And I talked to them straight after the grand final about, you got to stay humble about this, boys. It's really intoxicating winning an AFL Premiership, and there'll be so many people patting you on the back. And I've experienced that myself in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I can't believe how many times people want to talk to you about it, and you can get carried away. But I'm hoping that with the maturity of the group and the fact that, I've been through that Hawthorn experience, we've talked about, Harris Andrews actually talked to, because Hodge's talked to him about that exact same thing. Harris spoke to our group on the Thursday before we broke up. So the Thursday after the grand final, we had a team meeting and then the best and fairest that night. I know Harris kept the group behind and talked about that theme exactly. So, look, you can't guarantee that everyone's going to be, back down to earth and ready to get back to work when we get back. But I think we've got a pretty good chance that could happen, and the boys sense that they've got more success in them if they want to apply themselves. But what worked this year and the level of effort that we put in this year won't necessarily work next year. I think we're really clear about that. We've got to do it without Joey. So there's another opportunity there for somebody. It was, we had the same. Funny, I keep going back to my Hawthorn days, but the big Bud left after we won in 2013, went up to Sydney, and everyone said, "Well, that's the end of Hawthorn. We win 2 more," because there's always somebody else that will come along. You'll find a different way. If you've got good players, you'll work out a way to get the best out of the team. So as sad as I am to lose Joey, I think it's a great challenge for us to see if we can do it without him in a different way. So, I think we're doing as much as we can to bulletproof ourselves from a flat year, but there's no guarantees with all that sort of stuff. And my job as the coach is to keep an eye completely on the environment and that we've got, and make sure that we do a good job at keeping an even keel and everybody humble and grateful for the experiences that we've had, and to be optimistic going forward.
It's a great answer. Did you know Joe was retiring the week of? Because I remember there was a big news release, and people were thinking, this is going to rattle Brisbane. Should it have been reported even? Was that something that was known to the group, or was it just, assumed that maybe that was going to happen?
I don't know how much the group knew, because it wasn't a conversation that I'd ever had with them or any individuals. I knew after a week after we got beaten by Collingwood in the grand final that the next 12 months was going to be Joey's final 12 months, because he phoned me up about a week after the finals and said, "Can we catch up for a coffee?" And I'm thinking, I didn't really know what he wanted to talk about, because as you know, Joey's an unusual character, so I didn't know whether he had theories about what we needed to do going forward or what it might be. But as it turned out, it was to tell me that if we had won on the weekend, he would have retired. And I'm thinking, oh, geez. And then he goes, "But I'm going to give it 1 more year, but I'm definitely going to retire at the end of next year." So I sort of knew that. In the end, I did call him and say, "Mate, I probably need to talk to our list manager about this, because he needs to have a bit of an eye on the future. I don't want to, surprise him at the end of the year. Are you okay with that?" And he was. And honestly, it didn't come out until a couple of days before the grand final. So we sat on that for a good 12 months.
Wow.
But I was grateful to him for telling us. I knew he'd be highly motivated in the finals. He's a great finals player, Joey. Is the bottom line. And then he came into my office on the Thursday after we won the grand final and said, "Can we have a talk?" I said, "Yeah, no worries. I think I know what this is about." And sat down and said, "Well, that's it." I said, "Now listen, mate, you sure you don't want a couple more weeks to think about it? You might think differently in a couple of weeks' time. Like, we're not in any rush around this decision, big fella." Because I'd rung his dad, Anthony, to get some advice. And that's what Anthony said to me, "Oh, just give him a bit of time, mate. I said, "Yeah, no, I'll give him whatever he wants." And so I said that to Joey. He looked at me, he said, "Fags, I was pretty keen on retiring when I was 20. I said, "Right, I'm now 30.
Yeah.
No, you got 10 more years out of yourself. That's pretty good. I think I've got no hope here." So I gave up straight away, and Joey's retired kicking a goal in the dying stages of a premiership win. So good on him. I mean, not too many people get to go out on that note. Shane Crawford's the last one I can remember at Hawthorn. I don't think Crawford didn't know he was going to retire, I don't think, at that point in time, but Joey certainly did. And if you watch the replay and you notice the celebration, because normally he doesn't carry on too much when he scores, he carried on in front of the members when he kicked that goal, and then his teammates are coming from everywhere, and I'm thinking, they know. That's what I thought when I watched that on the live and then on the vision. I thought, those boys sort of know. They must have had an inkling, or he might have told a couple of them. I'm not sure. He might have even told a couple of them out in the ground, I reckon. So,
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible career. And just such a great person. I think it's...
Yeah, I think he played under a lot of pressure. I think the Danaher name at Essendon is huge. They're the most famous football family at Essendon, and one of the more famous football families in AFL, VFL history. So, no doubt, as the only sibling that's really played at the highest level, he felt like he's been under a lot of pressure all of his career. I think he enjoyed his time at Brisbane. You're a little bit out of the spotlight up there, and you can just be your normal self, and you're not having every second person in the street wanting to talk to you about footy. So I think he really enjoyed his time with us. He certainly played with a smile on his face. You couldn't help but laugh at some of the stuff-ups he'd make, but you couldn't help either to admire some of the amazing things that he could do. So he was the full entertainment package, and it's sad that he's not playing AFL footy anymore, but 200 games, premiership player. Good on you, Joey. Do what you want. He's
done a great job. It's exciting to see what happens, and I love your point around one person leaving. As much as you think you can have an impact, like those good teams, just who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
Yep.
Hard question, and I don't even expect an answer here because it's too... I'd like one, but it's too hard. Players that you've coached and been a part of, can you separate any that you really enjoyed coaching, or you love something about them that has been unique? And it could be players at Brisbane, Hawthorn, even when you're at Melbourne. Has there been something that standed out to a couple of players that you've really admired?
That is a tough question.
It's hard.
There's been a lot. I mean, and as coaches, we always, if we name somebody, then we've left somebody else out, and someone will get their nose out of joint and all that sort of stuff. I'll probably go at Melbourne when I was there. I just loved David Neitz and how hard he was, and what a great leader he was, and how important he was for Neil Danaher when he took over as captain. We made the grand final in the year 2000, and he almost carried that club on his shoulders a lot of the time. So Neitz was a great bloke I coached the forwards at Melbourne for a while, so got to know him pretty well. The coach wanted to move him to centre half back at one stage, and I just said, I don't think that's a good idea, Neil. I kept him in the forward line, but he was super. Hawthorn, there were many players there that you could take your hat off to, but the guy I admired most was Hodge. I couldn't believe my luck when he agreed to come to Brisbane. I mean, he's not the perfect angel captain that you sometimes think captains are. He is a bit of a rascal inside, but a really good man with great values. Could lead those boys like you wouldn't believe, and he did so by example. Tough, hard on himself, but hard on others. Not the fittest, not the best athlete, none of that, but elite in terms of the sort of person you would want around your footy club to take them forward. At Brisbane, I find it really hard. There's the four blokes who are in the captain and vice captain sort of category at the moment. So Harris Andrews, Lachie Neale, Josh Dunkley, Hugh McCluggage. I couldn't separate those four blokes. All I could say to you is they're all capable of being captains of AFL teams in their own right. They each have great strengths. Their biggest strength is that they put the team first. They set high standards. They play in different ways, but they bring so much to the table. So maybe in 10 years' time, I could separate one of those blokes from the four, but right now that's where I sit with those fellas.
It's a great answer. It's more than I thought I'd get, so I very much appreciate that. Last one on that, a cheeky one. Who would the players say is the biggest coach's pet?
The coach's pet? Ooh, jeez. They'd probably say McCluggage was. Well, we turned up at the same time. I mean, him and Berry, they're hard to separate.
Yeah, you came all together, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. And, I played them when they were nowhere near ready to play. They got to 50 games in about their third year, and they've ended up premiership players by their mid-20s. So, but I guess what I love about them is that they did it hard early days, and through all those hard times, they didn't lose their way, and they've been strong enough mentally to become really terrific AFL players. And probably McCluggage and Berry as well. I'd put in that category.
Last one, mate. You've been incredibly generous with your time. I was just reflecting on the year now in itself. Obviously, off season, I'm sure there's a lot of work to do with the draft. Trade period's just finished up. I'm sure there's still some things to work out, obviously, with Levi Ashcroft coming into the club, Sam Marshall as well, which is just amazing to see what two young players will be able to do to help you guys next year. What do you do in the off season? Like, are you heading away for any development? Do you more just want to refresh and get away, or do you have any plans to head overseas and do anything?
No, last year I went overseas. Visited a few clubs, went to a conference in London, spoke at a conference at that conference in London, sort of told the Brisbane Lions story. I probably should be going back this year to tell them all that we won it, but I've decided not to go overseas this year. The last couple of years have been pretty hard on me and my family, to be fair. So I'm probably looking just to get a bit of energy back and freshen up a little bit. I read a lot, so there's so many things you can read in books that are great. Professional development. There's a lot of great coaches and people in sport within this country that I'll spend a little bit of time with. I'll probably catch up with Frank Panisi from the Melbourne Storm, who's a bloke I talk to regularly. I love their culture, the way they just keep knocking on the door year in, year out, and they don't salute every year, but they're always thereabouts, and every now and then they get up and win one. So they've been great at that for a long time. So, more locally this year, just to try and freshen up a little bit and get going again for next year, because I'm not getting any younger, am I? So don't know how many years I've got.
Prime,
I don't know how many years I've got left at this caper, so I want to make the most of them.
Book recommendations? Anything you've read that you'd like to suggest? What's been some big wins for you?
There was a book called Belonging, and I should be able to remember the name of the author, but it escapes me.
I'll look it up
at the moment. I think that what resonated with me in that
Owen
book,
Eastwood?
Owen Eastwood, that's him. Yeah. Every sports coach should read that book. Anyone who runs a business should read that book. You know, the fact that people can produce so much more for you if they feel like they belong, that they're making a contribution that's worthwhile. It's very, very underestimated, I think. And, as a coach, someone said this to me at one stage. It's not what you say, what people remember, it's how you make them feel. And I reckon that's what we try to do at the Lions, and most successful organisations do, is they make their people feel really good about themselves, and that they can grow and prosper and be the best version of themselves that they can possibly be.
Oh, Fake, you're a star, mate. I genuinely can't thank you enough for your time today, and I think it's given us an incredible insight into why your players love playing for you so much. Would have loved to run through a brick wall for you, albeit maybe in the NEAFL, but I would have done it anyway. So thank you. Thank you very much for your time, mate. I really appreciate it.
You're a very humble man, Dylan.
Thank you.